So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so what is the objectives of this webinar? This webinar is focusing on core vocabularies and CPSV-AP. We aim to resolve some issues and have discussions for the issues that won't be resolved for the next release, but we need to elaborate on them and see how we are going to handle them. And we would like to invite you to share your feedback on the XSD schemas of the core vocabularies that will be shared in the upcoming weeks. And of course, the blog article that is related to the XML of the core vocabularies. So if we move to the next slide, please. I suppose you are all familiar with SEMIC and core vocabularies, but in case you are newcomers, I would like to just mention very quickly that SEMIC is all about semantic interoperability. We are focusing on promoting share and reuse of semantic assets. The semantic assets are aimed to facilitate and support public administrations, and we like to identify opportunities for alignment of semantic definitions, metadata, reference data sources, etc. So without any more ado, I will give the floor to my colleague, Emil.
Okay, and then as you're all present here during the core vocabularies webinar, we assume you're aware of the core vocabularies. As you know, they are focused on supporting the e-government, and they are aiming at mapping some fundamental characteristics that are present in the public sector data landscape in Europe. They aim to be simple, reusable, and extensible. So with simple, we mean we're only focusing on the essential elements, allowing the member states to adjust it to their context, which is the extensible, and of course the reuse, because we would like everybody to reuse the same concepts and make everything interoperable. Today, we will start with issues on the core vocabulary, followed by issues on the core public service application profile, and then we will close with core criterion and core evidence issues. Also, at some points, we'll ask some audience members who have submitted issues for some clarifications. And I have received note that some community members had some concerns they want to highlight in addition. So if you are one of the people that recognize yourself, do not be afraid. I might say your name. So the first, let's see what is the status of the current core business vocabulary. This is the current specification. At the core, we have our legal entity, which is a formal organization, an organization which is an agent. We have included accounting documents to comply with the BRIS regulation. We allow ADM as identifier. We use to identify our legal entities. We allow contact points from the other core vocabularies to be used, and any legal entity can have a registered address, which is a core location address. So the first issue came from the Nordic countries who are making their own Nordic core business vocabulary, and they identified that the core business vocabulary as it is now at the European level does not cover all the requirements laid out in the BRIS directive. And some other EU initiatives might also need the similar information. In particular, what is missing is signatory rights for businesses and beneficial ownership of a business. On the right-hand side, I've included the classes that are present in the Nordic core business vocabulary. And they specifically introduce beneficial owner class, signatory rights class, signatory rule class, and a post class. Post as in role, just to be clear, it's a role somebody plays, but we would also like to use post as a role is already defined under another vocabulary in the EU vocabularies with different semantics. I will first show an expanded view of the Nordic core business vocabulary. So I've not included the whole vocabulary here because I wanted to focus on those new classes. As you see, they are reusing legal entity as is present in the core business vocabulary, to which they assign a beneficial owner, to which is also signatory rights are associated, and these signatory rights have signatory rules, which would indicate that a certain post or function, how they can sign documents. These are then all related to a subclass of core person, as you can see. So the post is taken up by a core person, and the beneficial owner is a core person. So going back to the issue, I have two main questions for the audience right now. In your view and your usage, is this kind of modeling missing in the core business vocabulary? Have you also encountered the need that the Nordic countries encountered, and do you want us to include such modeling within the European core business vocabulary? Also, I would invite any representatives that worked on these classes per Nordland who posted the issue to elaborate further if they want to.
Yeah, so from the Nordic countries, yeah, we saw that this was missing. We wanted to be able to show how a legal entity, how the signatory rules, or you could call it representation rights, maybe also, how that works for a legal entity. It also partly used by BRIS solutions and maybe other upcoming EU legislations that probably will need it. So we saw a need of it, and that's why we worked on this model.
Yeah, and we can add in also, Per, that we choose to actually work with the EU core vocabulary. So we have based our work on that, and then we identified some gaps, and that's what we have been looking for.
Yes.
So we found
so from a Nordic point of view, I would answer yes on the first question. I think core business vocabulary, it would be good if they cover this also.
Okay, then may I invite anybody from another member state or organization if they have any thoughts? Otherwise, I think the need is clear and we put it as a yes, this is in scope of the core business vocabulary. Is there any member state who wants to add or even indicates we need to go beyond this addition? I take silence as endorsement. So yes, this should be covered. Or Josema, is there in the chat any remarks? As I do not have the.
No, okay. I'm keeping an eye on.
Oh, perfect.
There is only sorry, Emil. There's a comment from Germany saying that the core business vocabulary is not sufficient when it comes to role. And a question: to what extent is Nordic core voc aligned with EIDAS 2.0 legal person?
It's aligned to what did you say?
To EIDAS 2.0 legal person.
I could perhaps comment as also a member of the EWC large-scale pilot at the moment, and the upcoming We Build large-scale pilot for the digital wallets. Personally, and colleagues of mine also from all the EU countries actually have been interested in reusing the EU core vocabularies also in the context of digital wallets. We are a bit worried about that the knowledge of the EU core vocabularies, especially maybe the EU business core business vocabularies, is pretty low which leads to the fact that when we tried to promote the idea that, for instance, the eIDAS legal person attributes should be modeled according to the core business vocabularies structure and format, then that has not been so easy to convince people who are not familiar in this. We strive to follow the EU core vocabulary, especially, for instance, one tricky thing is the identifier, the ADMS identifier class, which is, how would I put it? People who don't know it, they tend to become almost hostile when you propose that you should use a generic identifier class for all identifiers for a legal person. So it's a bit tricky, but we are actually, these people who are working in the EWC and will be working in the WeBuild consortium are really looking forward to some intensified cooperation with the SEMIC team here, so that we could together raise the awareness of the core vocabularies also in this context. The Nordic ones is, I would say, we are trying to be totally aligned as much as possible, as Torbjörn and Per mentioned, with the EU core vocabularies. We don't want to invent anything of our own unless there is some gaps and something needed. But the eIDAS 2.0 is yeah, well, it's another story. Thank you.
A little internal question, Anastasia. Do you think we can take up action in this regard and help further promote the core business vocabulary towards the eIDAS team, or we can at least explore it? So we noted it down that there is really this
Yes.
need.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yes, we should definitely explore it. We note it down and we will consider it and come back to you.
Georges Lobo is present and he has raised his hand.
Yeah,
please.
So hello for people who don't know me. I'm new team leader of SEMIC. We will for sure convey this with our colleagues responsible for eIDAS. I mean, as well, I suggest that you also push within your countries to also relay this request via your channels, because I mean, usually there is also some pressure from member states. It helps to enforce this type of things. It does not to come only from us, but it has to come also from member states. So I suggest as well that you use your own channel inside your administration, inside your governments, to relay also this message. Thanks. Over. I finished.
Thank you very much, Josh. So given now this context,
sorry, Mio.
is there?
I think
yes.
that Mick had a hand up.
I'm not muted. No, I'm not unmuted. Sorry. Yeah, I would like just to add one thing here, which I would like to add as both as a question to the whole SEMIC team. How should we look at the possibilities of the upcoming Interoperable Europe board to promote the idea of pushing forward the use of the EU core vocabularies in different contexts, especially regarding business? There are lots of regulations that actually stipulate sets of information about businesses or to be used in business context. One example, for instance, is the Company Law Directive amendment with the EU company certificate. All of these should, in my mind, be aligned and basically 100% based on the EU core vocabularies in order to become interoperable, right? And just wonder how we could promote that sort of a cooperation, and maybe with the help of the Interoperable Europe board, raise the awareness of that we have a good basic solution that we can expand. We have the vocabularies in place, but they should really be used in these different contexts. At the moment, I don't feel they are that well known. Thank you.
Maybe I can answer to that. I mean, the interoperable board, so we had the first meeting, so we will have several meetings, and first to set the agenda. Normally also this year, we should start to have in the Act, there are these so-called labeled interoperable Europe solutions, which are a solution that are highly recommended to be used by governments. And this is how, I mean, normally the plan is to have a core box as part of Interoperable Europe solutions. And in order to convey, I mean, we will set up also this year a community that is Interoperable Europe community, which is according to the Act, I would say the sounding board from the field towards the board. So, I mean, when the community will be, I mean, I think in some months will be live. I encourage you also to join and to raise this thing, to raise this issue towards the board member. And I guess the more people we have, the more support we got from experts working on the field, the more it has a chance as well to raise awareness and to also I would say disseminate in the rest of the administration as well. I mean, as you know, on this we have this the new commission has this mission to reduce administrative burden. I mean, both from citizens, but as well from our side. So we are also working actively on that, and this could be a point where we also could promote the reuse of the core vox that allows, I mean, to make the systems more interoperable, to apply from regulation. So there will be also a sort of exercise from our side to see the redundancies in between different regulations in order to address this redundancy and simplify the work. I hope it answers a bit your concern. It's still on the building, but we will keep you informed. Also, as part of SEMIC, we will once the community is in place, we will also communicate to you to encourage you as well to join this community, which will be, I would say, a sort of the direct community that the board will rely on to take recommendation, to adopt solutions, to do their work basically.
And just to provide some additional context, why would it be, for example, beneficial for the Core Vox to be an Interoperable Europe solution? When it's an Interoperable Europe solution, it will become part of the interoperability assessments that member states and the Commission need to perform when writing new legislation. What this in practice will entail is that with new legislations, policymakers will be confronted with, you're talking about business information, there is this exact solution that talks about business information. So during the drafting stage of their legislation, they already get confronted with the core business vocabularies, increasing the possibility for alignment. It is not mandatory for them to align, but we hope that by exposing them at this earlier stage, more alignment can be brought. Then I'm gonna circle back on this issue. So based on the remarks I received here, that we received here, it's clear that there is a clear need for it. It is within the scope of the core vocabularies, which means that by the next webinar, we will come with a concrete semantic proposition. As you see here, it is just on a high level which classes to include, but there we will go more in depth to the definitions of the classes and the properties, what can be reused from the member state. But in addition, based on the request, we will also look what properties and classes are needed to help it be aligned with EIDAS. Did I see it correctly that a hand was raised?
Yeah, I think so. Is that a new hand, Mickey?
Yeah, I'm talking all the time here, but I think we have to mention that in the Nordic context, we really would actually be glad to get some active assistance, maybe from the SEMIC team or from the community as such, because we noticed very soon after we created our first version of this signatory rights model that we were not even ourselves totally convinced about the terminology, which terms to use to represent the different things. As Per, for instance, mentioned, we kind of internally have already shifted from signatory rights or signatory rule to representational rule, and it's like every second week we come back to the fact that we are not really knowledgeable enough about which actual terms in English should be used. I mean, we basically know the concept we need. We need something that is called a signatory rule, and we need something that is called a post, and we need so forth. But what to actually call them? How to find the best term to label these classes or attributes? That's something that it would really be great help to work together somehow on this issue. Thank you.
We can, well, because we will also have to look into what are the semantics we want to assign, and during that process organize some bilateral meetings so we can solve this issue together, so we don't have to wait until the next webinar and then you have to maybe suddenly make a change, or we have to make a change. I think if we develop it in concert, that would be fantastic. Okay, we have also noted down this. And this allows me to proceed to the next issue on the core business vocabulary. There was also the request to further align with the high-value dataset regulation. What was identified as currently missing by the community is that the high-value dataset regulation requires you to communicate about the date a company achieved a certain status, meaning you have to report if a company is closed, on what day did that close, on what day did the company get struck off the register, on what day was it dissolved. Currently, as you see on the option, registration date is included, so that is one that we that indicates when was this registered. This does not cover all the needs, as a status change would not update the registration date in every country. Some countries might consider that a new registrations, not all countries do. Therefore, there is a need to include something referring to the legal status date. Now, two options are possible. The first option is to include a property called legal status date within the legal entity class, and this would indicate the date at which the current legal entity status has been achieved. Here, the thought process is that normally a legal entity should only be able to carry one status at a time, and therefore could also carry within its properties a legal status date, because it would be clear to which it's associated. But we might, some concerns might be brought that it's not always clear if, because it's 0*, which legal status belongs to which legal entity status. This should normally not be a concern, because your legal entity should only carry one status in a logical sense, so the enforcement doesn't come from the specification but from practice. But this is, of course, an assumption. And therefore, option 2 also exists, where we create a class where we move the legal entity status to, and there we can associate it with the legal status date. This class would then really make it concrete which date belongs to which status, and isolate it from legal entity. It will also allow the core business vocabulary to be used in a manner we normally do not support. And that is, normally we do not include timing aspects completely within the core business vocabulary, because that would open the floodgates to including a temporal aspect to every property. And we wanted to clarify here, by making this change, we don't open the door. The intent is not to include a temporal aspect to every property within the core business vocabulary. The reason why we add this temporal aspect at this point in this time is because it is required for the high-value data set regulation. So, to have the concrete propositions laid out so it's easier to vote. Number 1, add legal status as a property to legal entity. Number 2, introduce a new class and move legal entity status there and include a legal status date. Or number 3, do not apply any changes because I do not see the need. Before we proceed to voting, I do invite also everyone, please, do you see another solution that we can include as a number 4 option? Or do you have any remarks to say why you're in favor over one of the options towards another, just so we share all our point of view, that everybody has the full picture before proceeding to a vote.
Emil, we have a hand up. Sebastian?
Thank you. Yeah, at the first moment, option 2 sounds more reasonable, modeling-wise. But I wonder about the naming and design rules applied. We cannot, to my understanding, we cannot use the name of the class and then add attributes, and then we call it legal entity status date, legal entity status code. Same for legal entity activity. I think we should take the name of the class and then add the attributes, and then it's this gives the context. So just a general remark to care for how you name the things. And I understand that the registration date still is something apart. You do not see the registration as a legal entity status, right? If not, I would have thought that this is part of the legal entity status, the status being registered and the date of registration. But perhaps there are other concerns why you say we need this apart.
So it's kept apart because we need to keep it within the model, even if we introduce this change because of backwards compatibility. That's reason 1, is more technical. Then semantically, it's if we would proceed with option 1, that would be necessary because we're talking about 2 different statuses. In option 2, we would prefer to also keep it so that a legal entity, their registration can be easily found without that it can easily be displayed in conjunction with their current status date as well.
And how do we react to the attributes that repeat sometimes the class name and sometimes not?
Yeah, there's for the ones that do exist currently, I cannot change them because they have been agreed and accepted. But what we can do is, of course, be consistent with our future approach. So legal status date, this one is the new name we're discussing. And there, I leave it up to you in the chat, maybe if anybody has a proposition for the name and how they want to approach the naming. Because the name, to me, it's more the concept that matters. So I can, in the future, go forward with not repeating class names before the property name is indeed, it's a bit a repetition of information. If this is your preference.
It's also from an implementation point of view, this forces you to treat an legal entity status different from other status. And we lose the power of saying there might be status in the core vocabulary. So it's always this threshold between being specific and being generic, but I think the status is something with the code list, that should be handled more generic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely I now think as well in the case where we're having this separate class, it is clearly within the legal status concept because it's in the class, so then we can reduce it to just have date indeed.
Yeah, or perhaps the class is not the legal status because it's status plus date. So the semantics of this class cannot be the name of one attribute here.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so we can't solve it now, but just please reconsider the exact name.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's legal status information with several properties inside.
Okay, that's good. I will take that with me when we're. So to be clear about the process as well. So now we're discussing, then we will take the discussion and make that into a concrete semantic proposition, which we will release before the next webinar, so that during the next webinar, you have something concrete to discuss. So this will definitely be included with using clearer names and more consistent logical names. Thank you, Sebastian, for bringing. Yeah. Is there anybody else who has a preference or any remarks?
Ricky again, I think.
Yeah, I can actually just mention, yeah, it's really good. It's not actually good to hear, but it's really informative to hear that there is still a debate about the same thing that we have been also debating in the Nordics for many years about this, how much additional prefix information do you need in the attribute, for instance, if you refer to this legal entity activity and legal entity status. At the moment, actually, we have a similar construct in the Nordic core vocabulary, that we have the legal entity and its legal status is its legal status, but then the code, actually we point to a separate code class directly. So we have a generic code class that could work. But yeah, I mean, legal form and legal name are pretty clear, but these situations where you a bit too unnecessary perhaps repeat the name of the class, then it would be nice to get some sort of a agreement on how to deal with that in like generally. Thank you.
If there are no further remarks, I would like to request, with the note that the names currently discussed are not on the slide are not the final names, I would invite all to either vote 1, 2, or 3 in the chat, and we'll take the outcome and proceed as is voted for. So voting is just 1, 2, or 3 in the chat.
Also, I can say, Emil, that this a topic that was raised now regarding names of attributes. It's nice food for thought for us, so we can tackle it in the style guide, in the revision of the style guide. Maybe we should dedicate more space to it and consider how we want to approach it from now on, because we have there some statements and some proposals, but based on what was discussed now, we should reconsider it and update the style guide. So we note this also. Thank you for your comments on this.
Farouk, can I ask you, can you link the style guide GitHub page in the chat? This will also allow every attendee, if there are any other remarks of this kind that you would like to address, we can always put an issue on the style guide. Any approach related changes we apply there will then also apply to all the core vocabularies. So if you come across during your own modeling exercises similar issues where you think like, this is not best practice or should not be best practice, this should not be the approach, you can always post an issue on the style guide GitHub page, and we will then explore it to be included in the style guide and therefore also apply to all the core vocabularies. Looking at the voting, I only see twos, so I think we have an unanimous vote there. It's good to see that there is a consensus. We'll proceed to the core public service vocabulary. And this is the current status. As you see, the core public service vocabulary application profile is quite extensive. It's not a few clauses, it's already quite big. Therefore, it's not that readable on the slide anymore. And I will also not go over the full model as we did, briefly did for the core business vocabulary. The first issue that arose that we are tackling today is there is no direct relation between a public service and the service concession contract. For context, the service concession contract is when the public body responsible for a public service engages a third party to actually execute or partially execute your public service. And that is then documented in a service concession contract. Similarly, we have the concept of channel. So this is the channel through which a public service is provided. This could also be associated with a service concession contract, as a third-party entity can operate the entire channel through which the public service is provided instead of only one particular public service. For this, we propose the relation as service concession contract from public service to service concession contract, and from channel to also service concession contract. This issue was posted by Jim Young, and I do invite Jim to provide any additional context or requests regarding this, if you like.
No more additional information. It's very good presented. Thank you.
Then, are there any questions in relation to this relations? I see and hear no movement, so I'm assuming there are none. Then I would just like to proceed already to voting if there are no further remarks, which you can do by posting plus or +1 in the chat. That will see that we have some momentum for this. Jim Yang has raised his hand.
By the way, I think it's a typo in the proposition. The second point is from channel, not from output.
You're indeed correct. That should indeed be channel and not output. Thank you for clarifying it. So for those confused, or it should be CV channel at the bottom, not CV output. So if you agree with CV channel and CPSV public service to receive such a relation, please post a +1 in the chat. Thank you.
Emil, can we clarify what exactly we are asking for people to vote? We are asking to add the relation for both, from both classes.
Yes, for both classes.
Okay. So they don't have to choose. Okay, so just to clarify this, so it's clear to everyone what they have to vote for. Okay.
Yes, so it's indeed a vote to include both, not either, but both or neither. So either we do both of them or we do none of them. But I think there should not be anything obstructing your current usage in the inclusion of this relation. So if we don't have any strong opinions, I propose we proceed with implementing it. I will continue. You can also still ask questions, even if I continue to a next issue. If you have a question about the previous issue, do not hesitate to ask them. If we're moving too fast, that can sometimes occur. So please feel free to come back to a certain topic. So this is another issue on CPSV-AP, and this is in relation to during design time, assign some requirements to an evidence that are not the requirements of the public service, but also to be able to indicate some characteristics of the output of your public service. So how does this differ, this use case, from just model it in output or just model it in the evidence class? These two classes are an instance of an evidence, an instance of an output, while here we want to be able to say all outputs of this public service, for example, will be provided in English. Or we require that your identity cards or your document proving your identity is expressed in Swedish. So a generic requirement on the evidence or on the output. And to be able to do this during design time of your public service. So what we propose to do here is allow the introduction of elements that restrict your evidence in evidence type. Why do we want to do it in evidence type? As you saw earlier, CPSV-AP is already a quite significant model. So if not strictly necessary, we prefer to not introduce new classes. Therefore, we would introduce such requirements within the evidence type. For example, add DCT language to evidence type to be able to specify a language in which an evidence needs to be provided. That would hopefully help resolve the issue around describing an evidence. Then regarding the issue describing an output, currently we don't have an output type class. We don't have a class that specifies anything on output without it being written within the output. Therefore, we would propose to introduce an output type class. And this output type class would play the same role as the evidence type class does for evidence, but then for the concept of output. This is a bit more. I can see that there can be discussion around this specific implementation. So I really would like to hear your thoughts from the community on this topic. Maybe Jim, you posted the issue, and whether you have a counter proposal or another view on this, we do invite you to share it.
I'll have to look into evidence type B CCCEV to see the other relations that are connected to or from this class in order to answer the question about the proposal. The other issue that we have is to connect both input and output to the existing data sets. So type is kind of difficult to connect. By name, a type is a type. It's not sort of a data set. But that's another issue. That's why we propose in our national application profile to name it required evidence. Then required evidence may be found in a data set, for instance, but evidence type may not be found in a data set.
Does anybody? So I don't have at this time a strong proposition considering the data set. So I do want to hear the opinion of other members of the community, whether you're encountering a similar issue, the same issue, how you have solved the issue, and how you propose to tackle it at the European level as well.
Emil, we also have a question from Jorge from Portugal on the chat. What would be the end result when there is overlay? Because some outputs may be evidences.
There, I would like to ask Emilio, could you give your view on this as you analyzed this yesterday?
Yes, hello, good morning. Indeed, you could double type the instance of the output with the evidence. So saying that the instance of output, it's also an instance of evidence, an evidence itself. And then having the possibility to define, let's say, such instance as two types, different types. At least that is a possible solution that I see now.
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Anyway, with those two classes, it's better than without. Then you are able to, in the design time, describe kind of evidence or kind of output that you need or produce from a service. So it's better anyway. So for the other participants, the concern that we have is when you have a service catalog, you describe what is expected, not what is the real evidence or real output. So that's our concern in order to describe in a catalog of service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was then the original need for this request, correct, Jim?
Yes,
yeah.
Correct.
Thank you. And would the solution as proposed now would be an issue because you then need to also be able to include evidence type or output type within the data set, correct?
Yeah, but both semantically and also in practical sense, type is not an instance of a data set. The reason that we need to connect to data sets is one zoning principle. When you know that the data that is maybe used as an evidence, then you have to reuse it. And also, when output can be input to another process, then you know that you have to connect and point to the data set that already exists. So one zoning principle is behind the rationale of this issue.
I see in the chat that there is some concern what the effect is on CCCEV. So I'm now taking the diagram with me so we can look at it together.
And also Sebastian has a hand raised in case. Yeah. Sebastian, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so I understood that the core vocabularies have the challenge that they are interoperable one with another, and that we cannot add now at core public service vocabulary information about evidences or requirements without looking at the same time at the other place, the CCCEV vocabulary. Regularly, we have these procedure requirements, as it is called in SDG, which can here be reflected by the requirements class. And required evidence may have a specific language, of course, but this is I opt for modeling requirements and evidences apart, as we see here. And Stamacia, I see you are also on the call. I opt for having the offer and the need, and then create a third mapping class with all the information, how the evidence that is offered by the how it is consumed by the consumer, quality, giving feedback. So I don't see that we should add several properties on the evidence class to define requirements. So at least it should be an own class called requirements, and then we have required language, required MIME type, required this and that. And but at the very end, I think we need 3 classes, like evidence, requirement, and then the mapping between.
Yeah. Okay, that does really make sense, because if you be normally I should be displaying the CCCEV diagram to you now. Is that correct? Yeah. So indeed, it would be weird to include these restrictions in the evidence type class at this point within CCCEV, as it does not fully fit within the scope or the intention of the current CCCEV model. So I do, from my side, I see this the need to have this in a separate class. So because there are 2 options now that allows us to also put it up to a vote. And so I would invite you all in the chat. If you vote 1, you vote for the proposal as it is presented on the slide. If you vote 2, we will create a separate class to cover these aspects, as Sebastian described. While everyone is voting, I would also like to talk a bit on the next topic. So this was the last issue under CPSV-AP. And I wanted to note that last week, SEMIC participated in Portugal in an Interoperable Europe roadshow, where the usage of CPSV-AP within the Portuguese government was highlighted. And I received the requests for AMA, the agency for modernization of the administration in Portugal, to speak or to voice their concerns during this webinar. So I do invite Jorge Sosa. If that is still the case, are there any concerns you want to highlight, any topics you currently want to discuss as was communicated during the roadshow?
Hi. My topics were related to the relation between the core person vocabulary and the CPSV application profile, because we have been trying to add the targets for the service to the model, as in we want to be able to represent services for persons, services for legal entities, services for government, and we haven't been able to understand how we can add it without conflicting with the participation class in the CPSV. And following your suggestion, I don't think it was you, or maybe it was Florian, in one of the discussions, I looked at the consolidated version of the vocabularies available in GitHub, and I noticed that the participation class is missing in that version, which would solve the problem, but it would create another problem, which would be so there's no participation. So the definition of participation, as it is in the CPSV, if I read it correctly, it's closed around the organization and the participation of the organization in the service, and it doesn't allow for other types of agents to have a participation, like being the end user of the service. Does this make sense? Does any colleague already found this problem or has a solution for this?
Hello, I don't have yet a solution, but in the property of public service, there is already addressee, which is indeed the intended audience of the like business or citizens of the public service. You might maybe need more, but that was the intention of that property.
But what is an addressee?
In CPSV-AP, inside the public service class, you have addressee, which is the target recipient of the public service.
But is it a code list or is it an
It's a
actual?
code list. It's a code list, and that's why I'm saying you probably need more. But that was the intention for that property. Yeah.
Yeah, but we would need more because there's more to describe around the addressee. So yeah, and therefore it wouldn't be feasible in this. And I found it curious because in the consolidated version, you really have the role there because there's a agent plays a role in the public service, but you remove the participation class. So I found it odd.
Probably is simply missing.
But if you try,
okay, we can look at it.
Yeah.
Maybe if you don't mind, if you can open an issue on CPSV-AP,
I will.
Then we can bring the discussion over there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So one of the solutions on it that might be considered is just the first thought. This is not to be incorporated, is to slightly open up the semantics of participation, indicating that being the addressee is also a type of participation in a public service.
This
should be a consideration to make.
Thank you.
So that brings us then, if there are no others, is somebody else who has a similar issue that they weren't able to post on GitHub, do please feel free to post it on GitHub. It's not because we addressed these vocabularies today that they will not be further discussed in upcoming webinars. If you have further concerns, they can still be posted on GitHub. Our next webinar will touch on what you have discussed today, what the concrete resolutions are, do you agree? And also on new issues that have arisen. Just to note for everyone. And then CCCEV, if there are no other questions in the chat, Josema?
No, nothing further.
So the next vocabulary to look at is the core criterion and core evidence vocabulary, which we already looked at a bit in the previous issue. So this is the current state of the model, as we were talking earlier about evidence type, as you remember. And the first issue that arose is that within OOTS and maybe other contexts as well, there is the need to provide an example, or there is the desire to provide an example of your evidence. So to include an example to evidence type was the proposition. Two options were mentioned for this. We can either reuse the same method as used in Bragg DKDP by using ADMS sample. But if we look at the definition here, it says links to a sample of an asset. And we might not want to consider the example as an asset. So that is a consideration we want to make. Then the other option is to create a new property, which could be example URI, which points to a URI of the example. So that can be a linked data concept, or that can be something hosted on that location. I would like to ask, is there anybody else who has seen this need to really provide examples or be able to link to examples from your data model, as would be requested here? I would really like to hear your specific cases and where you would need it. Okay. So I don't see immediately anybody wanting to add to the use case or expand on it. So I would like to inquire what is the preference by the community. Would we prefer to create a new property pointing to an example, or would we like to reuse the ADMS one to allow us to reuse semantics? So these are two valid options we see. So we would like your opinion, or if you see a third option, that is welcome as well. Okay, I see Jim has started voting, so also feel free to do that. And there is the question, when pointing to an example, would it be relevant to also describe the format of that example? That could be considered, yes. That would then require us to expand, of course, the approach we take to describe an example. Does anybody see, like Stamatia, the need to describe the format of an example?
I was mostly just wondering because OTS was mentioned as a possible usage context, and yeah, since then we make this distinction of how, in which format, so which distribution type, its evidence type can be provided. Yeah, I was just mostly inviting the rest of the participants to also consider this aspect, as that could be an additional functional specification there.
Thank you. It's food for thought, so it's good. So I would really like people to vote, because currently we have a vote for 2 and a vote for 1. Therefore, we cannot make a decision. So I would also like more than 3 votes before proceeding with any of the 2 approaches, because it's not a unanimous one. So I want some consensus, or at least enough momentum to say that we're justified in making this change.
Emil, in the meantime, Sebastian has raised his hand.
Sebastian, go ahead.
I just wanted to explain the need coming from OOTS. There we have the Evidence Explorer and a lot of other tools that are based on the Exchange Data Model, which itself is based on CCCEV. And when we include now a property here for the examples, I expect this also all the other tool chains, the Airtables, the sysadmin tools, so all the tools developed for single digital gateway implementation, that they will benefit from this. The need, knowing the MIME type before, well, I don't know. I see a lot of PDFs that will be considered, and sometimes I think the evidence that is delivered is also in function of the agent who is asking. So if an RDF agent asks, he will get an RDF file. If a browser asks, it will be PDF. So I think it might be difficult to state the in advance one specific format for an URI, as there might be different formats under one URI, following best practice receipts of W3C on publishing vocabularies.
Indeed, some content negotiation can happen, which ahead of time we cannot really say what is going to be the result.
It's in the same for language. I can imagine that we deliver a German example when it is asked by a German agent. So I opted here for number 1, but 2 might also be fine. Important is to, not to throw away this information, that there are example evidences. They are needed for mapping exercise and for discussing on the content, on the information entities in the evidence. Thank you.
Okay. So I agree that the need is there, also because it's related to an ongoing EU project. It has a high impact, so that's why I did not even provide the option not to adopt it. So it's really about which approach we're going to take. I see here that there are a few votes, not a lot. So I propose that we allow for further discussion on GitHub. If that does not happen, we will still go with the one that received the most votes, which is option number 2, with the note that Bert brought up, and that we can also discuss further on the GitHub page, is that we can expand the range to RDF as resource, RDF resource, or it's a typo maybe. So that allows us to really use any format of evidence. Then this one also comes from you or your team, Sebastian, is issue 56. And that is, there is really the need for many classes within CCCEV to be described. And currently the approach is quite inconsistent, as 3 classes do carry the DCT description property, which is evidence type list, information, concept, and requirement. While for other classes, which could require it for similar needs, information requirement, reference framework, evidence type, and evidence do not have DCT description. This is not too impactful proposition. So our proposition is to add DCT description to these classes that are missing it, allowing you to have a human readable description of your class instance. Is there anybody who has any remarks on this issue?
I think that information requirement might already inherit that from the requirement, that is the description, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I didn't notice that one. It's a good spot. So we will take that into account and double check it for all the other ones as well. So a similar mistake was not made. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Welcome.
Did anybody else say that I made, or any other addition, comments? Otherwise, I think we can proceed with this one. I see no comments, so I'll proceed. Within a similar context, so we were talking about a human readable description before for all classes. We now also have the need for class instance to have a human readable name. So what we normally use for human readable names like this within the core vocabularies is RDFS label. So one of the proposition is to add RDFS label to the same classes as discussed before, as mentioned before, or to recommend the usage of DCT description to add your human readable name, or 3, we do not see the need to add this to the model. It can be a choice made by the implementer if in case they want to prefer another attribute compared to RDFS label. I will not say which was my preference because I don't want to prejudice the voting. So please, if anybody has a comment on I prefer one over the other approach, go ahead and put a chat, raise your hands, or you can just unmute and speak up as well. Okay. As I see no movements, I will say which one I prefer, and then you can maybe say, no, I don't really want that. So I would propose to go forward with proposition number 1, which is add RDFS label to the classes in question. Is there anybody who disagrees with that proposition? And I see no disagreement, we will proceed with that one. If I'm going too fast, you can always come back on an issue as well. So don't worry if I'm going too fast, and my apologies for that. So that closes the issues to be discussed today. It were a few issues, more discussion on the first ones than on the last ones. That was to be expected. So now we'll touch on some other core vocabulary related assets that we've been working on, and we would really appreciate community feedback, as we are working on assets to be provided to you. So it would be nice that the assets we provide to you are actually useful. So first of all, this is a blog. I wanted to touch on a blog article that we as SEMIC produced last year. And we would still invite you, because it's still relevant, to have a look at it. We link also to a GitHub page where you can post any concerns. Yes, indeed, Sebastian, there are some unaddressed issues as well, which require where we were planning on reaching out to you to have some clarifications on how you actually see the resolution, etc. So yes, they will also be addressed, but we wanted to have a more thorough resolution to that than what we could briefly discuss during a webinar. I hope that is okay for you. Yeah, so the blog post on the XML schemas, this is a blog post that lays out how to use how XML schemas for RDF can be used, how the mapping can be explored. And we really would prefer your input here, because any input related to this blog post is then also relevant to the next topic on the slide. And that is, we are working on the creation of XML schemas for all the core vocabularies, because we have noticed in some projects, such as OTS, maybe others as well, that there is a preference to still use XSDs. And when they are used, those XSDs, we would prefer them to at least also follow the SEMIC specification and not be something totally different. So what is the current status on it? A draft is nearly ready for core business, core criterion, and core evidence, core location, core person, core public event, core public organization, as well as an aggregated one. We will publish these draft XSDs, so they will be published not as ready, but really as a draft, because we want input before we officially say these are the XSDs for our specifications. We want input on what is the approach taken in modeling, in writing these XSDs. Is this how you would like to use them? What is missing to fit your implementations or your stakeholders' implementation? Please, if you do receive the invite to review, you can forward it to as many people as you think are relevant, people you know that are working more with XSDs than natively using Turtle files, etc. Really feel free to share to anybody you might think is relevant. So in the coming months, we will send everybody who attended this webinar and who is also on the working group for the core vocabularies to review the XSDs. And your review will allow us to publish something that is actually suitable to the community. Once we have done this, and once there has been enough feedback, the process can be started to provide XSDs for our other specifications. So for the GetAP, and its profiles. That brings us to a close. That was the end of the webinar. We were done a bit earlier.
Emil, before closing, we have a question from Sebastian. For the XSDs, he asks if these XSDs will come along with some example XML so they can be validated against. I know that we will have some examples, but can we now provide more information on this, or it will be communicated along with the XSDs?
I will have to check with Emilio
Yeah, I can answer on this. Yes, the simple examples for each vocabulary, like we do already in the specifications. In each specification, I would say in that way, there will be an example at least for each vocabulary. Yes, and those examples should be indeed valid against the exam scheme. That's for sure.
Thank you, Mitya.
I think, Emilia, you can proceed.
My apologies, I was muted. Are there any other questions regarding the XML schemas? Otherwise, that brings us to an early close. I see nothing coming in. Okay, so the next steps. So we have now discussed a few issues. We have not discussed other issues such as Sebastian mentioned. So for both these types of issues, we would like to still invite you to provide feedback until April. And at that point, we will incorporate as much as possible in the next draft specification, allowing us to really explore in depth with you. Did we cover all the needs that were expressed in the issues and whether it's suitable for use? After that review, we can then hold another webinar where we discuss the problems identified during the review process. Then, as just mentioned, we will share the XSDs with you, and we are looking forward to your feedback on them. And then, of course, we will follow up with following webinars touching on these vocabularies, but also touching on the vocabularies not mentioned today. So do also feel free to post any issues on the other core vocabularies that you might still have. Based on the amount of issues, we will then plan the next webinar. And thank you very much for attending today. Then I have shown this in a few webinars already, but if you would like to take out your phone and scan the QR code, this is an EU survey where you can indicate your usage of the SEMIC specifications as SEMIC assets. This is important to us because we know then what is reused in what manner, what is more important, who shall we reach out to cover specific use cases. This is a way for us to gauge the community and to understand your needs a bit better in a more in-depth and thorough manner. It also allows us to focus on what do we need to develop in the future, which tools should we provide more support for, elements like this. So it is only in your benefit if you scan this and indicate the tool. It will, yes, sub-profiles are not all included in the survey. Thank you for highlighting it, Sebastian. I will ask the team to expand it further. But now so everybody sees what Sebastian did. Sebastian brought Healthy KDP to the top. So now Healthy KDP will be at the top of my mind when we are looking at what support we need to provide next. So feel free to bias us in the same way by filling in the survey and posting here. And thank you, Josema, for sharing the link as well. Now that you have had enough time to scan the QR code and the link is in the chat, I will truly say thank you all for attending, to providing inputs, but I would also already like to say thank you for any further input you provide on GitHub, allowing us to proceed with a next iteration of the core vocabularies. I wish you all a nice week, a nice day, and a nice lunch.
Thank you all, yes.
Thank
And
you very much.
don't forget to contribute with your feedback for our XSDs. You will be notified when they are available for public consultation.